Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on July 29th, 2026. On Friday of last week, Donald Trump, the madman in the White House, unilaterally declared a pause, as he put it, in the U.S. criminal bombardment of Iran. The so-called pause was nothing but another chapter in this interminable peace kabuki theater that we have been subjected to since Trump returned to the White House in January of last year. Yesterday, Iran put a merciful end to this absurd kabuki theater by attacking a U.S. military base in Jordan. The pause is now officially dead. In fact, it was never really alive to begin with. So let's begin with this statement issued by CENTCOM, that segment of the U.S. military that's responsible for West Asia. It put out this statement yesterday at 6:27 p.m., and I believe that that is Eastern time. The statement itself refers to Eastern time. So at 5:45 p.m. Eastern time yesterday, according to CENTCOM, the IRGC forces launched multiple ballistic missiles from Iran in an attempted surprise attack. I stress the words surprise attack on U.S. forces based in the Middle East. All Iranian missiles were successfully intercepted. U.S. forces remain vigilant and at a high state of readiness. Now, I'm going to come back to this notion of this being a surprise attack, but first I want to address the claim that all Iranian missiles were successfully struck down by the air defense systems of the United States military in or near Jordan. Well, as I've mentioned many times, one of the leading weapons experts in the United States, a former Pentagon advisor, former professor of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Ted Postal, has repeatedly dismissed scornfully the idea that the Patriot air defense systems, which are really the backbone of the U.S. military's air defense systems, is capable of bringing down ballistic missiles in significant numbers. Now, I think this is such an important point because it reveals the extraordinary vulnerability of the Arab Gulf autocracies and their oil infrastructure to ballistic missile attacks from the resistance. And so I think this is such an important point that I've actually, I'm going to show you an extract from one of the interviews in which Professor Postal explains his position. This was an interview he did on Daniel Davis's Deep Dive about a month ago, and it's a 2-minute segment, but it's eminently worth listening to.
What I want to talk about today is the overwhelming, it's unambiguous evidence that the performance of the Patriot PAC-3, the more modernized version of the Patriot Interceptor, is close to 2 or 3% intercept rate. It's not 90%. It's not even close.
Let's just pause there. He says unambiguous evidence. So he's not making a wild guess here. This is his considered professional conclusion based on abundance of evidence that it's not even 3% of ballistic missiles being taken down by the Patriot. Listen to what else Professor Postal has to say.
Incidentally, we had an experience similar to this during the Gulf War of 1991. During the Gulf War of 1991, the Army Air Defense Artillery and the contractor who built Patriot, the Raytheon Company, were telling the American public that the intercept rate of Patriot in the Gulf War of 1991 was near 96%. Now, this campaign of misleading information, or I'll call it lying, because they had to know, they knew what they were doing. This campaign of misleading information even misled the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, and the President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, into believing that Patriot was actually performing in the Gulf War of 1991. They both learned that this was not the case when they had a meeting with the defense minister of Israel, who told them in a meeting, I think it was February of '92, that the Patriot was not performing at all, and they were shocked.
That is how fraudulent Raytheon is. They lied not only to the public, they lied to the President of the United States and to the Secretary of War at the time, or the so-called defense minister, the psychopath Dick Cheney. They're even lying to those war criminals about the capabilities of the Patriot system. You think they ain't going to lie to you? That's exactly what they've been doing. So this raises the question, were any of these ballistic missiles likely to have been struck down, the ones that were shot yesterday evening Iran time at the Jordanian, the U.S. military base in Jordan? Well, as far as we know, the number of missiles that were shot were at least 3. And here's a video that was taken of the launch, or just after the launch. You can see there are, it appears, 3 lights in the sky ascending upwards. Let's watch that again. 1, 2 in the center, and then there's a third one on the left in the lower corner. Now, so that appears to be the minimum of the number of ballistic missiles that were fired by Iran at the U.S. military base in Jordan yesterday. So if you're going by just the odds, if the Patriot system generally takes down less than 3% of ballistic missiles, you would expect that none of these ballistic missiles was taken down. And that perhaps, if they were lucky, the American military managed to shoot down one of them. It's extremely unlikely, given the poor performance that all 3 of the Patriot documented over decades, that all 3 of these ballistic missiles were shot down, or even 2 of them were shot down. Now, it does appear that at least one of them got through. This is an image of the aftermath of a hit last night on that U.S. military base in Jordan. And you can see there a plume of smoke. I don't know from what distance that photograph was taken, but if it was far away, then that's obviously a sizable plume of smoke. Now, in any case, this all has caused Donald Trump to completely blow his stack. Predictably, he threw a few F-bombs at one of the talking heads over at Fox News.
On U.S. forces overnight in Jordan, President Trump tells Fox News about Iran, "We are going to beat the effing S out of them." He went on to say, "We'll be hitting them hard. They're going to get a beating." So clearly the United States is going to respond to what the president described as a surprise attack. He says U.S. forces had just minutes to shoot down these incoming Iranian ballistic missiles. The president says he has reviewed video of the shoot down, and it was U.S. forces conducting this operation to defend that area. He said it was real time. They were calling out coordinates and ensuring that none of this incoming Iranian fire got through. I also asked the president about those U.S. and Saudi air.
If he's got video of the ballistic missiles being shot down, why hasn't CENTCOM shared that video with us? That's because they didn't shoot down the ballistic missiles, certainly not all of them. They would be only too happy, I would think, to show us the video, and they could, redact images if they needed for some security reasons. But give us some evidence that you actually shot them all down, you pathological liar. But this notion that, this is a surprise attack, oh, shock and horror, they only had minutes to prepare for the strike, as if, the Iranians have an obligation to give them advance warning that they're going to hit them. Now, insofar as this was a surprise attack, this claim, who has engaged in this kind of treacherous and perfidious behavior more than anybody else? Well, of course, it's Donald Trump, pretending to be negotiating with the Iranians in June of last year when they launched the 12-day war in violation of the UN Charter in Iran. Again, in February of this year, pretending to be negotiating with Iran, and then launching the Ramadan war and slaughtering, Iranian political and military leaders, including the supreme leader and his 14-month-old granddaughter and his daughter. This man is going to complain about surprise attacks. But here's the thing, folks. This shouldn't have been a surprise at all. Why do I say that? Because just before Iran launched these missiles, it issued this warning. The headquarters of the IRGC stated the United States has continued its hostile actions and efforts to fuel instability in the region while attempting to impose an illegal naval blockade on Iran. I stress again, an illegal naval blockade on Iran. This blockade remained in place after the so-called pause began on Friday of last week, and it is an act of war. It's illegal, it's designed to do immense harm to innocent Iranians, and it is an act of war. So the statement went on and said, over the past 3 days, it being the U.S. Military, has threatened Iranian commercial ships, boats, and oil tankers operating in our country's territorial and coastal waters. We warn that this American action constitutes an expansion of the war in the region. As the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran have already demonstrated on the battlefield, they will not leave any threat or hostile act by the terrorist U.S. military unanswered and will respond accordingly. So you can take your claim of having been surprised and stick it where the sun don't shine, Mr. Trump. Now, the Saudis and the U.S. in the interim have decided to expand this war even more throughout the region. Last night, U.S. and Saudi forces launched murderous attacks against the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq. This was announced to the world by another CENTCOM statement put out last night at 8:21 p.m. So this would have been about 2 to 3 hours after the attack by Iran on the U.S. military base in Jordan. And the statement of CENTCOM issued at that time said that U.S. Central Command and Saudi Arabian armed forces conducted precision strikes in Iraq July 28th against Iran-aligned terrorists that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps directed to attack U.S. forces in a Saudi energy infrastructure. I'll come back to that claim in a second. U.S. and Saudi fighter aircraft struck multiple terrorist logistics and weapon sites across eastern Iraq in a strong response to over 30 IRGC-directed aerial drone attacks in the last 72 hours. The unwarranted attacks against U.S. forces were not successful. All of this is lies, of course. I mean, the U.S. and the Saudis and the Israelis, they are the terrorists here. They are the ones who target children. They're mass murdering children all over the region. And, you know, they are the ones who are acting without justification for their military aggression. They are the ones who are in violation of the United Nations Charter and a broad range of legal instruments, particularly pertaining to human rights. And then the statement continues from February through April 2026, there were more than 600 attempted attacks on U.S. citizens and facilities by Iran-aligned terrorist militias in Iraq. The Americans are illegally occupying the country after having illegally invaded it and caused the deaths of over 1 million innocent Iraqis over the past 2 decades. And therefore, all of this, of course, is a stinking pile of crap. The one piece of truth in it is that, in fact, they did attack Iraq last night and caused extensive injury and damage. I'll come back to that in just 1 second. Insofar as the claim that Iraqi forces struck Saudi energy infrastructure, which you can see here in the first paragraph of this CENTCOM statement, the Iraqi resistance denied this before the Saudis and the U.S. military launched these attacks on Iraq within the past 24 hours. And here you can see the denial. This was published on Fortress Resistance Channel on the 26th of July. The Iraqi resistance denies the accusations by Saudi Arabia regarding the drone attack on Aramco facilities this morning. This is a reference to the massive crude processing plant in eastern Saudi Arabia called Abqaiq. This is near the Persian Gulf coastline and Qatar and Bahrain. It is, in fact, the case that huge damage was done to that facility, but the Iraqi resistance denied from the outset the Saudi allegation that they were behind it. And the statement by the Iraqi resistance goes on to say that the fabrications are nothing more than an attempt to justify their inability to respond to the devastating Yemeni attacks that have targeted the depths of their infrastructure out of fear of the nature of the next Yemeni response. So they're not explicitly saying this, but this seems to imply the Iraqi resistance denial that perhaps it was Ansar Allah that was behind this attack. And Ansar Allah has not been shy whatsoever of taking credit for its very effective attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure. Now, after today's murderous attack, which reportedly killed at least 20 persons and injured dozens of others, the Iraqi resistance published photos of some of the martyrs. At this point, there were 10 persons known to have been killed, and you can see them up on the screen. Judging from their attire, these were mostly, if not all, active members of the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq. The Saudi-U.S. attacks are said to have struck Popular Mobilization Force headquarters in the provinces of Baghdad, Wasit, Nineveh, Basra, Kirkuk, Karbala, and Diyala, causing varying degrees of material damage to a number of headquarters vehicles and military equipment. And we also have a video of the aftermath of some of those strikes. And here's that video. Now, as you can imagine, the statement of the Popular Mobilization Forces in response to these attacks is a rather harsh one. I think it merits a closer inspection. The statement begins, the Islamic Resistance Harakat al-Nujaba, the forces of global arrogance and subservience represented by the brutal American occupation, the mercenary Saudi coalition, once again reveal their true face in blood-stained doctrine of treachery, violating every principle of sovereignty and national dignity. At dawn today, the hands of treachery and aggression extended to target the heart of Iraq's peaceful cities with aircraft and missiles in a blatant act of aggression that leaves no doubt that this suspicious alliance recognizes neither sovereignty nor agreements, but desperately seeks to subjugate the proud Iraqi people who have defeated the tyrants of the earth. And then they issue, the resistance, 5 demands addressed, at least in part, to the Iraqi national government. First, expel the occupier and eradicate collaboration. The continued presence of U.S. occupation bases and facilities on Iraqi soil has become a grave threat to the country's security and stability. Second, end all forms of cooperation with the criminal Saudi regime, which has proven itself to be the head of the serpent and a financier of terrorism against Iraq and its people. Third, we call on the Iraqi government to immediately break its silence and not limit itself to statements of condemnation, which only encourage the aggressor and embolden further escalation. Fourth, we demand the immediate acquisition of advanced air defense systems to protect the country's sovereignty and airspace, and that all those responsible for leaving Iraq's skies exposed to the will of the aggressors be held accountable. And finally, we in Harakat al-Nujaba will not allow the tyrants of Washington and the Arabs of Saudi Arabia to violate Iraqi soil without paying a heavy price from their interests and security. And I think it is a virtual certainty that the Iraqi resistance is going to inflict serious blows upon the murderous Saudi autocracy, which has shown itself to be extremely vulnerable, certainly its energy infrastructure. And in fact, the U.S. military bases, even the U.S. embassy in Riyadh, the CIA section of that embassy, have been struck with drones and missiles. So they are literally, it seems to me, the Saudi autocracy in the process of potentially committing suicide. But that's what happens when you're nothing but a vicious, corrupt vassal of Washington. You act in ways that are profoundly contrary to the interests of the very people you claim to represent. One other party note I want to mention here before I leave the subject of Iraq is that a comrade of mine by the name of Hussein Baroud, who leads one of the organizations in Iraq that is pro-resistance. He himself is not a militant. He spent a lot of years in the U.S. He then traveled back to Iraq some time ago. And when I was in Baghdad in 2024, I met him, and he acted as my guide as I reported from Baghdad for Reason to Resist. Well, we learned within the past 48 hours, Rami Yahya and I, that Hussein has been arrested by the Iraqi government. Apparently, he is accused of having issued some kind of a threat against the Iraqi prime minister. I'm not aware of any evidence to support that claim. And this could just be part of a broad campaign by an Iraqi government that has been far too collaborative with the United States aggressor to suppress the resistance forces in in Iraq. But in any event, we will continue to follow the news about Hussein Baroud's incarceration, and we'll share it with you as we obtain it. On a final note with respect to Iraq, it appears that the Iraqis have successfully taken down an American drone over the Al-Milha area in northern Babylon province. Unconfirmed footage circulating online shows the wreckage of what is believed to be an MQ-9 Reaper. Now, in addition, Iranian forces continue to target hostile Kurdish separatist forces in northern Iraq near the Iraqi city of Erbil. Here is a video, unconfirmed, of a strike on Erbil by Iranian forces last night. Now, there's also a video circulating of the aftermath of apparently that strike. And as you listen to this, you'll hear secondary explosions suggesting that what the Iranians hit there was an ammunition depot. In addition, the IRGC just published a video of missile launches it refers to as the Saharaga operation, and it describes this as part of the IRGC's Nasser 2 operation against U.S. air bases and U.S. Central Command Center in Jordan. Apparently, the missiles, as best as I can tell, were launched after the yesterday's launch of missiles at Jordan, and after the Saudi and American attacks on Iraq. And here is a video of that launch. As you can see, this particular round appears to consist of at least 2 ballistic missile launches by the IRGC. This takes us to the question of what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. And the short answer is Iran's military continues to throttle traffic through that all-important strait. And here you can see a statement issued in the past 24 hours by the IRGC, announcing that 3 oil tankers ignoring warnings by Iran were struck and brought to a halt. Also, they mention here that they targeted a U.S. airbase and Central Military Command Center in Jordan with several ballistic missiles. An image shows a likely impact at the Muwafaq al-Salti airbase. That's the image in the upper left-hand corner, which we've already shared with you. And in the past 7 days, the shipping intelligence firm Kepler estimates that a mere 2 million barrels of oil exited the Strait of Hormuz, a total of 15 tankers exited, with 4 of them being related to Iran. So that would have been over the course of 7 days. You're talking about an average of less than 2 tankers per day. The pre-war level of traffic was around 130 to 140 vessels going through the Strait of Hormuz every day. And here, by the way, is some imagery published by Kepler showing how little traffic is currently passing through the strait. And you can see there is a collection of green and red dots in the upper half. Those are vessels that are basically anchored off of the Iranian port city of Bandar Abbas, and the vast majority of them are not moving. And to the extent there's any traffic going through the Strait of Hormuz, you can see here that it's happening closer to the Iranian coastline. So this would be the authorized lane which the IRGC has set up, and there's almost nothing going along the coastline of Oman, which is the lane that the United States tried to open up and has attempted to facilitate with military intervention. So I'm going to show you this once again. You can see there's virtually nothing happening there along the coastline of Oman. Now let's turn to the war between Yemen's Ansar and the brutal Saudi autocracy. First of all, this is my daily reminder that the Saudi dictator had a bromance with the notorious pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. And there you can see a photograph that was recovered from Epstein's opulent mansion in Manhattan, showing him and the so-called Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, yucking it up. Salman, again, putting his arm around the notorious pedophile, who's smiling broadly, holding on to Epstein for dear life. That is the nature of the Saudi beast, my friends. Let us never forget that as this extraordinarily dangerous and destructive war unfolds. The Saudi autocracy is at the core of this fight, and I believe all indications are that it is entirely compliant with the wishes of Washington, which seeks to destroy not only Iran, but any and all forms of resistance to U.S. hegemony in the region. Now, a few days ago, we showed unconfirmed video of an apparent Yemeni missile strike on the Saudi Red Sea port of Yanbu. This is a very important port during the current war because there is a pipeline running from eastern Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea coastline in western Saudi Arabia, and that pipeline ends in Yanbu. And through that pipeline and from the port of Yanbu, Saudis have managed to export millions of barrels of oil per day during the course of this war, even when Iran was being precluded from exporting any of its oil by maritime transportation. Now, what was getting out of Yanbu, although significant, was much less than what Saudi Arabia was exporting during the pre-war period, but nonetheless, it was enough to significantly alleviate the crisis in the global oil market. If, in fact, Yanbu was hit, and if that has compromised Saudi Arabia's ability to export oil through the port of Yanbu, then that is going to significantly worsen the already extremely dangerous oil crisis in which we find ourselves. As it turns out, this unconfirmed video that we showed a couple of days ago, it has now been confirmed by satellite footage that, in fact, Yanbu was struck. And here, let me show you one of those satellite images right here. You can see before and after photo of a significant part of the Yanbu oil infrastructure being wiped out by what apparently was a Yemeni missile strike. The Saudi autocracy has now revealed that it has shut down the facility at Jazan. That would be the state-of-the-art refinery there. And it's unclear when, if ever, that facility will be back online and operating at full capacity. In addition, Ansar continues to strike Saudi tankers in the Red Sea. For example, it reported yesterday that Yemeni armed forces carried out a military operation targeting the Saudi oil tanker NCC Ghazal for violating the maritime navigation ban imposed on the Saudi enemy and disregarding warning calls. The vessel was targeted with several ballistic missiles and was forced by the grace of Allah to retreat and turn back. The Yemeni armed forces affirm that they will continue enforcing the maritime blockade against the Saudi enemy under the equation of blockade for blockade and comprehensive escalation for comprehensive escalation. What are they referring here to when they say blockade for blockade? Well, they're referring, of course, to the criminal genocidal blockade led by Saudi Arabia on Yemen for over a decade, which has caused the deaths in all likelihood of hundreds of thousands of innocent Yemenis. The Ansar Allah forces are fed up with this blockade. They're not only having to deal with that blockade, of course, but they were attacked by Saudi Arabia several times in the past 2 or 3 weeks. And they are saying that unless and until the Saudis lift that decades-long blockade, or that more than decade-long blockade, they are going to continue to blockade Saudi ships in the Bab al-Mandab Strait from the Red Sea into the Gulf of Aden, and will continue to target Saudi oil infrastructure, which, as we can readily see, is extremely vulnerable to attacks by the resistance. And you'll see here, I put up on the screen another statement put out today by the Ansar Allah forces, and they say they're ready to intensify the conflict with Saudi Arabia. Mohammed al-Houthi, a member of the Supreme Political Council of Yemen, says as the battle drags on, the Yemeni people and their armed forces will become stronger and more advanced at all field and tactical levels. The Yemeni official stated today the balance of power has changed in favor of the resistance, and the enemies have no destiny but decisive defeat, and they will not, and if they do not learn from time and history, Yemen will teach them a great lesson. Difullah al-Shami, a member of the Sana government and a prominent member of the Ansar Allah movement's political bureau, in his turn announced in a speech to the same effect that Yemen is ready for any action to fight the enemy and break the siege. So the only thing that is going to stop the attacks on Saudi Arabia and the blockade on Saudi shipping is a lifting of this genocidal siege on Yemen. And so far, there's no indication that Jeffrey Epstein's bosom buddy, the so-called Crown Prince, is willing to finally lift that criminal siege of Yemen. Now, as one would expect, this has caused the price of oil to spike again. I checked oilprice.com just before I began this video. That would have been at around noon today, July 29th. And at that point in time, the price of Brent Crude had gone up 8% since the beginning of trading this morning, pushing it back up to the level of almost $91 US per barrel. It was just above $100 per barrel on Thursday of last week. But when on Friday, Donald Trump announced his so-called pause, this fraudulent pause, the price of Brent crude plummeted, and it got down to as low as $83 a barrel yesterday, even though all of this vital energy infrastructure is going up in smoke in West Asia, and even though there are huge blockages of tanker traffic through the Bab al-Mandab Strait and the Strait of Hormuz. And even though global oil inventories are continuing to be depleted. And in fact, the most recent report about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the United States is that it drew down during the past week another 3 million barrels, putting it at its lowest level since March 1983, shortly after the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was established. So by all indications, the price of oil should be way over $100. It's extraordinarily suspicious that it is only at the $91 level now. But sooner or later, the chickens are going to come home to roost, and the price of oil is going to reflect the physical reality in the oil markets. And the physical reality is increasingly dire. Now, with that, I'd like to turn briefly to the subject of Lebanon. With all the drama in the Persian Gulf, the genocide in Palestine and Lebanon has ceded from public view to a degree. And I suppose that's understandable given that the oil crisis threatens to destroy the entire global economy. But nonetheless, these are horrific crimes being carried out to which we must continue to pay attention. And I just want to highlight at this particular moment that the Lebanese resistance continues to resist Israeli aggression in South Lebanon. There have been multiple reports during the past several days, some of them backed up by photographic evidence of Israeli artillery strikes on targets in southern Lebanon. And the Lebanese resistance retaliated to some of these strikes by destroying what is reportedly a D9 Israeli military bulldozer in South Lebanon. And here's a video of the aftermath of that strike, which was carried out with a loitering FPV drone. Now, what you heard there, I believe, was another artillery strike. That sounds like an incoming artillery shell, which was fired undoubtedly by Israel. But in the distance, you can see that yellow glow, and that reportedly is the wreckage of the D9 bulldozer that was struck by the resistance. This brings us finally to the war criminal Netanyahu's current and ongoing trip to Washington. Ostensibly, he went to Washington to attend the funeral of that bloodthirsty warmonger, Lindsey Graham. And so too did the Ukrainian kleptocrat, Volodymyr Zelensky. And of course, Donald Trump was there. It was a cornucopia of war criminals and corrupt thieves, suitably, I would say, at the funeral of this bloodthirsty warmonger. One of the interesting aspects of this funeral, by the way, is that it was invitation only, whereas, as I've covered extensively here on Reason to Resist, the funeral of the martyred supreme leader of Iran was open to the public for 6 of the 7 days, and tens of millions of people showed up. I can assure you that the number of people who attended the funeral of Lindsey Graham was an infinitesimally small fraction of those who showed up voluntarily to mourn the murder of Iran's martyred supreme leader. But another interesting detail about this funeral, there was a lot of speculation about what actually killed Lindsey Graham. Some people wondered if he was killed in a Russian strike on a Ukrainian military industrial facility that Graham visited shortly before his death. And I can't say whether the official version is correct or not. What I can tell you is that his funeral was a closed coffin funeral. Why didn't they allow the mourners to see the body of the dead senator? Well, I'll leave you to speculate as to the reasons for that. But at the end of the day, I think there is good reason to be suspicious about the official version of Lindsey Graham's death. Now, returning to the subject of Netanyahu, Netanyahu and Trump held meetings after the funeral, and both of them claimed that the meeting went swimmingly. And here, in fact, is a photograph that was published by the madman in the White House on Truth Social. And you can see both him and his fellow child murderer grinning from ear to ear in the opulent something or other room at the White House. Now, why wouldn't Netanyahu be swimmingly happy? After all, the U.S. is doing all the heavy lifting in the criminal war on Iran, and even Israeli officials like Smotrich are bragging that it's the Americans who are paying the cost and taking all the casualties at this particular point in time, something which should cause America firsters to be particularly irate, I would think. But all of this is likely to change very soon. Part of the reason for that is that the Israeli Minister of War, himself a war criminal, Israel Katz, revealed over the last 48 hours that the United States has been using Israeli military bases, air bases, to launch aerial attacks on Iran during the past 2 weeks of bombardment. And we're in the remarkable situation where the Israeli Occupation Army Radio is now accusing, as you can see up here on the screen, the war criminal Katz of violating military censorship regulations by revealing during an interview with Channel 14 that U.S. aircraft had taken off from bases in Israel and carried out strikes in Iran in recent weeks. This information concerns a report that had been prohibited from publication in Israel over the past several weeks. Military censorship was later compelled to authorize its publication following the war minister's remarks. It is important to note that under Israeli law, the only one authorized to approve the publication of classified information, apart from the chief military censor, is the prime minister. In other words, the war minister has no authority to disclose information of this nature. Notice that there's no denial in here that what Katz said is true. So effectively, Israeli Occupation Army Radio is admitting, at least implicitly, that the U.S. Air Force has been using Israeli air bases during the past 2 weeks to launch these criminal attacks on Iran. Well, it's not surprising that the Iranian military has reacted strongly to this. And here is a statement put out today by yesterday, I should say, the IRGC after Katz started flapping his gums in violation of military regulations. And the spokesperson of the IRGC is quoted as having said, "Anyone in Israel who wants to stay alive should leave immediately. We are heading toward a prolonged war, and its end will be very frightening. We are fully prepared. This war will only end with the destruction of Israel." Now, since we're on the subject of Netanyahu's visit to Washington, I have to say a few words about these Western war criminals who are allowing Netanyahu's plane to fly through their airspace. They include the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the leader of Italy, Giorgia Meloni. The Netanyahu's plane traveled through their airspace. I believe it also traveled through French airspace, yet another sin to add to the long litany of sins of Emmanuel Macron. And of course, predictably, it also traveled through Canadian airspace. This has been confirmed not only by websites that monitor air traffic, but also by the Canadian government. And in fact, the Canadian media was prepared on this occasion to challenge the government of Prime Minister Goldman Sachs, also known as Mark Carney, on its apparent decision to allow Netanyahu's airplane yet again to travel through Canadian airspace after he was indicted by the ICC. And here's an article published yesterday by the state broadcaster, the CBC, noting that Israel, according to its government, asked Canada for permission for Netanyahu to use Canadian airspace. And the article confirms that Netanyahu flew over Eastern Canada for the third time, but the Carney government won't say if it let him do it. And the body of the article reports that the same spokesperson of the Canadian government declined to say whether the government of Canada had granted permission for Netanyahu to enter, suggesting that it was up to the leader of Israel to decide whether to use Canadian airspace. Quote, Global Affairs Canada does not comment on which route a foreign state chooses to take. This is a lie, and it is not up to the war criminal Prime Minister of Israel whether he gets to fly through Canadian airspace. In fact, that is preposterous. And a professor of international law in Canada by the name of Mark Kirsten, who's been outspoken in condemning Canadian complicity in Israel's genocide, he's quoted here as saying, as a matter of law, it isn't up to Benjamin Netanyahu to choose where he gets to fly, if that means flying over Canada. And he notes, he wrote a book, in fact, Justice in Conflict, The Effects of the International Criminal Court's Interventions on Ending Wars and Building Peace. And I did a little digging this morning after seeing this article, because I was pretty sure that the Canadian government had barred Russian linked aircraft from using Canadian airspace. And it took me just about a nanosecond, that's all, to find this. This is a statement from NAVCAN, which regulates aerial transportation in Canada, back from 2022, when the invasion of Ukraine began. And it reads, following the declaration by the Minister of Transport, Canada's airspace was closed to all Russian aircraft operators on Sunday, February 27th. This is just after the invasion began. Transport Canada requested that NAV Canada, the independent operator of Canada's air navigation system, issue a notice of airmen accordingly. Quote, all aircraft owned, chartered, or operated or otherwise controlled by a person connected with Russia or which is registered in Russia, and all operators holding an air operator certificate issued by the Russian Federation authorities are prohibited to enter, exit, or overfly Canada's airspace. Now, Russia's president at that point in time had not been indicted by the ICC. That came later on. It did happen a lot faster than Karim Khan was willing to indict the Israeli war criminal, even though Russia is not accused by any international tribunal or before international tribunal of committing genocide in Ukraine. It has had various allegations leveled against it, particularly by the Ukrainian and other Western governments involving violations of international law. But there's no credible allegation that Russia is committing genocide in Ukraine, whereas it's very clear and has been for quite some time that Netanyahu is committing genocide in Palestine. And this is something that even Israeli human rights organizations have opined, in addition to Western human rights organizations like Amnesty International. And despite that fact, the Canadian government on 3 separate occasions has not used its lawful authority to bar the entry of Netanyahu's airplane into Canadian airspace. At the end of the day, Mark Carney is fully complicit in the crimes against humanity of Israel, not just because he allows this warmonger, this child murderer, to travel through Canadian airspace, but also because he allows weapons and weapons components made in Canada to be sold directly or indirectly to Israel as it carries out a genocide, and is also purchasing military equipment from Israel as it carries out a genocide, and is also sharing intelligence with Israel, and continues to confer economic benefits on Israel through the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement. And I could go on and on. So yes, Mark Carney, I say to you, you are a war criminal, and you should be hauled before an international tribunal and tried for your complicity in war crimes, you disgusting human being. Now that I've got that off my chest, I'll call it a day, and thank you very much for listening. We will be back to you tomorrow with more on the unfolding crisis in West Asia.